Hello and welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast with Dr. Jeff Myers. This is formerly the Dr. Jeff Show. Even with our new name, though, I'm going to continue talking with thoughtful guests about important topics, even topics where we disagree, all to help you better embrace God's truth and champion a biblical worldview. And along the journey, we're going to see how Jesus, who is the truth embodied, changes everything. I want to demonstrate how to have thoughtful worldview conversations and show how we can be the hands and feet of Jesus. So the podcast is going to be released on the same feed. You don't have to subscribe anywhere else. It's just that the new name, Truth Changes Everything, will help make the show easier for new listeners to find. And I hope also that it shares the heart of what the show is all about. So please tell your friends and family about this update. Racial strife, culture wars, political differences, there is a shadow over the promise of America. But amid this turmoil, is it possible to understand what kind of responsibility we can take for our faith, family, and freedom? Well, welcome to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Jeff Myers. This is the show where we explore where God is at work, changing everything through Jesus, who is the incarnation of the truth. Today, we're going to discuss how truth changes how we think about responsibility, how we think about family, how we might be united in this country under shared values. And my guest to talk about all of this is Kendall Qualls. He's a faculty in residence at the Crown College School of Business and founder and president of the nonprofit organization Take Charge. Take Charge strives to unite Americans, regardless of their background, toward a shared history and common set of beliefs. Kendall has been deeply involved in politics. He was a candidate for the Republican nomination for governor of Minnesota back in 2022, and his message about Christian values has reached millions of people on various media platforms. His story alone is worth the price of admission to this show. Please welcome Kendall Qualls to the Truth Changes Everything podcast. Kendall Qualls, welcome to the show today.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jeff. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's fun to have you on the show because to me, you're famous. You are in my favorite magazine, World Magazine, and they had a feature in there on some of your work, which is absolutely incredible, combating fatherlessness, helping families, and your own personal story is remarkable. And I wonder if you would begin with it, your story of growing up in poverty in New York City and in a trailer park in Oklahoma to becoming a United States Army officer and eventually even running for governor in the state of Minnesota. Man, right. That is a life journey right there.
That's only a story God can tell, right?
Yeah.
But you know what? I'm very fortunate and actually blessed. And unfortunately, like many people that have come to the faith and have gotten stronger from it. But I started out in poverty. I started out in a very tough situation. My parents divorced after my dad came back from Vietnam, and we moved from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, home of the 101st Airborne, to Harlem, New York. Now, at this time in 1968, around that time, 69, Harlem was not a pretty sight. It wasn't gentrified as they had been in the last few years. It was an epicenter for drugs, violence, gangs. I was only in first grade. And on day one, right when we get to our grandparents' apartment, we're a block away from their apartment, we're held up in broad daylight.
Wow.
Still luggage in hand and everything. And I'll never forget these words. My mom is pleading with this guy, please, mister, this is all the money I have. I only have 5 kids. And there's a guy standing probably 5 feet away, no shirt on, and could barely stand because he was either drunk or high on drugs. And he says, lady, that man doesn't care if you have 5 kids or 10 kids. You better give him all your money. That was day one.
Wow.
And I could tell you, I know what government surplus cheese tastes like. I know what powdered eggs taste like. I know the violence in an inner city where sirens and yelling and screaming is constant 24 hours. But what I do remember, my mother was a God-fearing mom. All she wanted to be was a mother. She never had a driver's license. But she taught us that, Kendall, just because you live in a place like this doesn't mean you have to live like you're from a place like this.
Wow.
And although the city was pretty filthy, I fought maybe once or twice a week in elementary school just to defend myself. When I finally got to the apartment on the 10th floor of this public housing project, when you opened the door, it was like a ray of sunshine coming in the dark cave.
Yeah.
The apartment smelled so clean. It always smelled like Pine Sol. My mother was from the South, and she believed that cleanliness was close to godliness. And just because you live in a place that's filthy doesn't mean you have to live in your own surroundings in a place. It was probably the cleanest place in New York City. So anyway, my mom unfortunately could not handle all 5 of us kids by herself. My older brothers and sisters were getting absorbed into the street culture. And so my younger brother and I moved with my father. And at this time, he was in Oklahoma. He was a drill sergeant, still on active duty. And because he was paying alimony and child support, all he could afford was this trailer in this trailer park. And that was my next step as in 5th grade. And in fact, I thought it was an upgrade compared to where we were in Harlem.
Wow.
And so I tell people, that over the course of my life, what I've learned is that in this country, it doesn't matter where you start in life. You don't have to stay there for the rest of your life. There is a pathway out. And unfortunately, a lot of kids don't know that pathway. In fact, a lot of our leaders are shutting the doors of that pathway of exiting out of poverty, especially these inner cities. So that was my start. So I'll stop there to see if any questions, but happy to continue as we go forward.
Yeah, I want to hear. We do want to hear the narrative of some of the things that you've been working on, because this is really profound, and people can find that article in World Magazine and see some of this if we don't get a chance to cover it all.
Yeah.
But I wanted to follow up on that. Why do so many people believe that you are in bondage to your past, that if you've been disadvantaged, that there's no opportunity for flourishing? Because it used to be the case that people thought, well, you can live the American dream. You may have come from a very low place, but you can move up if you are willing to work hard and if you're willing to be diligent and be a good person.
Well, here's what I've learned over the course of my life. I didn't know this at the time, but in a lot of black communities, you're told at knee high, you're never going to make it. This is a racist country. There's the racist people. White people don't want you to achieve. White people are going to hold you down. Now, there was a historical precedent for that, and my parents lived through the Jim Crow South. If there were 100 job openings, they couldn't apply for one and get a job. They lived through that. But that has ceased over 50, 60 years ago. And but that narrative is still there and is there to give people power over an uneducated, illiterate population. So that's why that narrative's there. And when you're told that, and when you're 5 years old, by the time you're 25, you believe it. And it's hard to unprove something that's been indoctrinated into you for so long. Especially when you look all around you and you see dire poverty and just everyone's circumstances are much like yours, but you see a world out there that people are prospering, but you're not sure how they've done it while we're stuck in this position. And this is what our organization is about. So I'm telling the history about this, how I got started, because it influences so much what we're doing today. And so when I moved with my dad, I had the love of my father, the love of my mother, the compassion of my mother, and the discipline of my father. And it was discipline all the time. And when your father's a drill sergeant, you get discipline and rules, on steroids. Very little love and compassion. So I had that. They just were never together when I was growing up. But I sure wanted to get out of the house as soon as I turned 18. I worked when I was 13 years old, worked full time after I finished high school. Worked full time, was in the Army Reserves, graduated college, in 4 years, even though I worked full time. And I went on active duty, became an Army officer, artillery officer, and served for 5 years in stateside and as well as in South Korea. But I wanted a different life. My parents grew up in the Jim Crow South, was in the Army for 25 years, my dad, and my father-in-law, 30 years. And they both came from the Jim Crow South. And I told them I was going to get out. They said, Kendall, don't get out of the Army. This is the only place in America where you're going to be treated fairly. and you're having a great career. Who knows, you could become a general. I said, I don't want this life for my family. I don't want to move around all the place, and military has high percentages of divorce and all that. So I decided to get out of the military. I got an advanced degree. I had two at the time. I got my third graduate degree at University of Michigan. And then I started with Johnson & Johnson in sales management, and marketing. I got promoted to the home office. I tell this one story that I'm going to do just quick because this is so significant about this progress in America. So I'm at the home office in New Jersey. I'm a mid-manager. I'm a director. I'm a director of a billion-dollar brand. I'm head of marketing. I have a $90 million budget, and it was my 35th birthday. I go in the office, and I'm less than an hour away from where I was held up in Harlem, New York.
Wow.
Okay, and that's significant. And that time frame, the significance of that progression. And I tell people that story because I said, look, I would love to tell you I'm exceptional. I'm not. I have an average IQ on my best days. I serve an exceptional God. I live in an exceptional country. If I can do this, you can do this. But again, the door was shutting. So what got me involved over the course of this time, I spent my entire life in the private sector. My wife and I raised 5 kids. We've been married since we graduated from college together. I tell people we have 5 kids. We adopted one. I can't remember which one. I love them all the same. But what changed our life before we got started in my early 20s, because I didn't want to do anything with the church. I didn't see any relevance with the church when I was in my 20s. I saw it growing up, and it was a lot of churches that were in the black community were like an Al Sharpton kind of thing. But someone invited me to a Bible teaching church in Dallas, and it literally changed my life. It absolutely did. And my wife and I devoted our lives in maturing spiritually ever since we were 27 years old. We homeschooled our kids along the way. I had a lot of corporate moves. But what I found when we moved to Minnesota a decade ago was over the last few years, we started hearing this idea of systemic racism, and America's America's a place where not for people of color, and is guilty of systemic racism, is irredeemable, and all of this. And we're like, that's not true. My parents lived through that system. I didn't. In fact, I would say that they would have loved to have grown up in the America I grew up in. And I felt that no one was sticking up for what was truthful and right. This was less to do with Republican, Democrat. This was like right and wrong issues.
Yeah.
And so what I found the biggest with this is to say, well, look at the disparities we have in our country. We do have huge disparities, but they're not because of racism. And when you look at what happened, and this is a spiritual issue that the church never really stood up. In my lifetime, in the black community, the black families have gone from 80% two-parent families to 80% fatherless homes without one initiative to reverse the trend.
Wow.
And I just felt that this is wrong. This is driving the disparities. I mean, these were political, social programs. I would love to share. I'll send this over to your program manager afterwards. But there's a U.S. Census data chart that I have that shows that black women were more likely to be married than white women from 1890 to 1970. What changed? The social welfare policy that was introduced that incentivized women to have children outside the bonds of marriage. And as long as no husband or no adult male lived in the home, those benefits continued, whether they had one child or multiple children. Well, that was an artificial insertion of a policy that disrupted a culture that today has not recovered since. That's the driver of disparities, the fatherless home crisis in our country.
This is shocking, but give that statistic again from 80%.
Yes. Maybe you got to, in our lifetime. 80% of black families were two-parent families.
Uh-huh.
Today, it's 80% fatherless homes. And when I say I'm not talking divorce. Look, in any major city, and we have health records and data that validates this. and we can send you references to validate it as well, independent references, is that in any major city, in a black community, anywhere from 80 to 90% of children are born without a father in the home. Now, there might be the guy living there for a while, but he's not going to be there in 6 months or a year. So why do I say this? It's because of black women that have given birth. Now, 60% of them, nearly 60%, have given birth to children from multiple fathers. In the Hispanic community, it's 30%.
Yeah.
And in the white community, it's like 15%. And this thing is spreading beyond the black community and in not a good way. And these are issues that I believe that the progressive left wants to make sure that it doesn't become in the mainstream news media.
Right. Well, obviously they would. Yeah. And I think the way somebody on the progressive left might accomplish that is by saying, if you talk about this, you're being racist.
That's right. Well, I'll give you another statistic. Again, this is Pew Research Center, 2000. I think it's like 5 years old now, maybe 2020. United States has the largest percentage of children that grow up without a father than any country in the world, times 3.
Wow.
We have a fatherless home crisis in our country, and you can see it by looking at the symptoms of our young people. You know, the highest percentage of kids and generations that are on mental health medications, that are depressed, that have anxiety. Our families are not, we're not living according to God's directed will. And so when I go into the black community and I speak to women, I say, look, God did not intend for you to raise your children alone or to live your life alone. All heads not up and down, but they don't know what to do next. Because leaders are not guiding that pathway, lighting that pathway as they should. And I'm so passionate about this. My siblings took a different direction in their lives. It's impacted my nieces and nephews, their children. All of my nieces are young mothers, having never been married.
Wow.
Over half of my nephews have been incarcerated. And this is nothing more than going back to living what God's designs were. His designs were not to be punitive. It was to protect us from all of this calamity that we've been in for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I guess that you've raised the question, and that's what we should spend the balance of the show talking about is what should we do? You mentioned that all the heads nod up and down, but we haven't had the leadership.
Right.
And I'm sure we could place a lot of blame. Bad social policies result from bad worldviews. No doubt about that.
I think it's even more than that, Jeff. This is not just bad social. So, you have a bad social policy after the first, maybe the second decade, but after the third and fourth decade, now we're looking at 4 to 5 generations of kids that have never seen a father or responsible male, not only in their homes, but in the entire community. So this has been a deliberate ignoring of this problem for political gain and power. Power is the issues going back from the dawn of man, the elite few, wealthy and privileged, at the expense of everyone else.
So, if I understand what you're saying, people who are those elites who are in a position of power, they benefit politically from the African American community being splintered in this way?
Oh, absolutely. And so again, I point directly within the African American community. So, for example, the Congressional Black Caucus, none of them had. You look over there on their website. You can look at all the programs that they support. Restoring two-parent families is not one of them. Hasn't been one of them at all in the last 30, 40, 50 years. However, they're wealthy in their own districts. Maxine Waters, for example, in California, she lives in a $5 million outside of her district, in the poorest district in the world, and not in the world, but poorest district in the state of California.
Yeah.
And you can replicate that all the way from Baltimore and in our major cities across the country.
Yeah. Well, it's incredibly shocking. And, I think a lot of people who are watching and listening right now are thinking this is consistent with my experience. But maybe they're along with the people in your audience who are saying, yep, this is the way it is, and it should be otherwise. But how do we get from here to there? And to talk about the work that you're doing and the difference that it's making.
So, and that's it. I tell my kids, the world is full of problem identifiers, but very few problem solvers. Be problem solvers. And you know what? So it first starts with this. Our organization is how do we restore the Black community to its cultural roots? We're not trying to do anything new and fancy. The cultural roots were, if you would describe the Black community, I would say generations ago, people would say, regardless of their background and skin color, they'd say, oh, wow, the Black community, they're really religious, okay? They're Christian faith, they're Christian focused, family oriented, and they want better schools. They want a better education for their kids. So our mantra has been faith, family, education. And so when I go out and speak, and that's all I speak about, I call out, where are the people that should have been doing this? I'm not a pastor. I tell people, I just been pastored well.
Right.
And God expects his people to stand up against evil. And what's happening to our kids, we have prisons full of young men with no fathers that can't read. We have young boys and girls that have been abused physically, sexually, because there's been no father in their homes to protect them. And they know this. And look, we do polls every year, and Black families, they're looking for solutions. So one of the things that we're doing, we're recruiting volunteers to help spread the message within their communities. On our website, if you go to our website at takechargeus.com, you click on our YouTube channel, that top right little icon, it looks like a play button. We have the largest video library of Black Americans that call for the need to get back to basics of faith, family, and education. And they denounce critical race theory, they denounce the DEI, and they denounce the whole Black Lives Matter, all that. I mean, that's divisive. The things that are dividing a country, we denounce, and we talk about the unity of getting back to basics. So that's one, because it has to be a grassroots movement. We have paid now managers, chapter people that we have now in Memphis, Tennessee. I'm going to be expanding to Omaha, Nebraska, to Detroit, Michigan, and in the Latino community here in the Twin Cities of Minneapolis. In Minneapolis, in the Latino community, their unwed births now is 60%. In a ethnic group that used to be strong family identity. And then also we're starting schools. And the reason why we're starting schools is because what we've found, not only is the academic standards declining and expectations declining for these kids, our kids, so we would take intact Black families and we go to these after school programs and we say, here's the formula, do well in school, graduate, go into the trades, get a trade certification or college. Either one's great. You're not a second-class citizen if you decide to go in the trades, and then get married, then have children. And the kids would ask us, well, why do I have to wait to get married, to have children? I don't know. Why do no one else wait? And we're like, oh my gosh, we have to start all over. That's why we're starting these schools. And so instead of raising money to build new buildings, we're going to churches, we're going to pastors and churches and saying, look, we want to lease your facility from Monday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. And we're going to start with K through 3, 20 to 25 kids, 2 teachers, and we're going back to the basics. We're using Hillsdale curriculum, just a Judeo-Christian Western Civ classic education. We're using PragerU videos. It's a Christian school. And you know what? We've overcomplicated education. We're getting back to the basics.
Yeah.
And I tell people, it's amazing what we accomplished in a nation before we had the Department of Education in 1975. It's amazing what we accomplished in this country when all we had was a piece of chalk and chalkboard. Right? No iPads, no phones, no computers. We put men on the moon. We had the greatest economy in the world. We lifted people from poverty to prosperity with a piece of chalk and chalkboard and the classics. And so this is not, hey, we're going to go back to the 50s or go back to the 60s. I tell people this all the time because I get criticized. Well, you can't go back in time. No, we're a winning coaching staff taking over a habitual losing team. Yeah. And we say, this is a football. This is a three-point stance. And we're getting back to the basics of blocking and tackling because we know how to win games.
Yeah, so good. I love that. I love the idea of the partnership with churches. That makes sense. So many churches are unused real estate Monday through Friday.
Yeah.
And you can get these children into schools. I love the Hillsdale curriculum. Pretty familiar with it. And are these now charter schools, Christian schools? How would you describe them?
These are Christian private schools.
Okay.
We have generous benefactors. So we believe that the parents should have skin in the game. So we want them to pay anywhere. We're going to make it low cost, $150 to $200 a month. Mm-hmm. They need to have some skin in the game. And we're going to subsidize the rest. The charters, what I've found already is just the bureaucracy of just getting your school certified, even in a church that has classrooms, is a big mess. I mean, literally, it's a Herculean task to get this done. But we want to keep it kind of a Hillsdale model. We don't want to be chartered or sanctioned by the government to raise our kids and teach our kids right and wrong. And they need to be rescued from these public schools. And literally all across the country, regardless of race, they need to be rescued. And so we're doing it. And God, thank God, we have generous benefactors, and we're reaching out to people across the country. And we're going to tap into local people that are interested in helping to save children and getting back to the basics of what made our country wonderful and make us all Americans, regardless of our backgrounds. Again, because Jeff, here's the dirty little secret. We didn't have a racial problem. Up until 2003, again, I'll send you this slide as well. The Pew Research Center has been tracking race relations. Actually, it's not Pew, it's Gallup. The Gallup organization has been tracking race relations for decades. In 2003, 70% of Black Americans and 70% of white Americans rated race relations good or very good. 70%. Highest it was ever. It wasn't in 2013, under the second term of President Obama, that we started to see this decline, and this whole idea of Black Lives Matter, hands up, don't shoot, racist cops are targeting black men. All of that was an orchestrated lie. And I have the data. We have the data now to prove it in hindsight, looking back. But anyway, up until 2003, we have made tremendous progress as a nation. But all of that has been lost here in the last 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, I see that. And in fact, when I mentioned that I had this conversation with George Yancey, the sociology professor from Baylor, and he mentioned specifically that Gallup poll that you were just referencing.
Yeah.
And that specific point where 2012, 2013, all of a sudden it starts to drop off the cliff. And part of his research is exploring why that is the case. But
I'll send you data that shows why. Yeah. And what we started saying, newspapers, LA Times, New York Times, Washington Post, all of a spike in reports of racism, systemic racism, all that in 2013, and historically there was nothing like that.
Wow. Okay. Well, this is fascinating to me. I'm curious if somebody's watching or listening and saying, we ought to be doing this in our town. You mentioned that you've started one in Memphis, started one in Omaha. What do they do? Is there something that a church can do, even if they don't have a paid manager?
Yep. So here's what we're operating. So like, again, this is how God is, you don't even know God's preparing you. So, as my time as a leader in the Army, and then in corporate America, launching brands. I was a regional vice president. I had over 200 people, salespeople working for me across like 15 states. And so I'm just replicating what I've done in my last 30 years.
Yeah.
And so we're operating a hub and spoke. We have a corporate headquarters. This is us. My wife is leading the school operational part. We hire and screen teachers. we're making this low cost turnkey for churches. We pay them a monthly lease. And then we hire the teachers, the curriculum. Our kids come in, we clean up after we leave, and make it as I say turnkey and clean as possible for the churches. And if they want to do this, they can go to our website at takechargeus.com. Contact us, just to leave a note. We'll follow up and we'll coordinate that. So our first school, we don't have them yet. We have our first school. We're starting, just started in South Haven, Mississippi. This fall, and in 25, in the fall of 25, we have 2 here in Minnesota. We have a church in Detroit, Michigan that wants to start one, and then one in Memphis, Tennessee. And so we're doing the screening and getting the preparation for next year. But we got a school ready to go that we're starting already in Mississippi this year.
Yeah, Kendall, if this is amazing, if a church, say, or a community group says we need to attack the problem of fatherlessness in our own community and among the people in our town, what do you do? Because I'm a dad. If somebody says you're a bad dad, that's only, I'm gonna, I probably could be a lot better. You always have those feelings about it. But what do you do? What can a community group or a church do to promote man-woman marriage? Do you have to start with classes on how to have a good marriage? You have to start with classes on dating, or what? Yeah. So that's a great question. So here's what's happening. My wife is all over this as well. She says, look, the feminist movement has infiltrated even to the church, where now, marriage within the Christian communities look at 50-50. Well, that's not a model. That's not a biblical model. And, and we want to make sure it's one definitely where men uphold the virtues of their wife and support their wife and families. I mean, we've off the mark, so we need to do a lot of teaching around that. But I give you an idea. So we're actually we've produced a marriage film that encourages marriage. It's going to be out in Easter next year. Okay.
We're in the finals, and we're partnering with our friends in not Memphis, but Nashville, Tennessee. This marketing team is involved in The Chosen and on the distribution and marketing on The Chosen.
Yeah.
And it's going to be a docu-film of young couples that have lived together before they got married, some that have never lived together, some that have been married for 70 years. They're nearly 100 years old. Single people that are, just trying to figure it out. They can't find the right people. And interspersed in those is going to be a pastor of a 2-campus church. I don't know if you know Brad Wilcox.
Yes.
The author of the book Get Married.
Yeah.
He's in this film.
Wow.
And so it is going to be something. We need to encourage marriage through the vehicle and the channel of film, but also in the church as far as making marriage as a committed ministry in churches. Women are looking for it. Men don't, they don't even know how to court today. Mm-hmm. I mean, literally. And so there's a tremendous need for it. But what we're doing, there's tons of organizations that mentor young teenage boys. I feel at that point, because I've been a mentor my entire life, it's hard because you're unteaching things that these guys have been taught. Yeah. And trying to get, and there's a lot of hurt and pain and scars along the way. So that's why we're starting K-3. Literally, like the new Israelites that have come to the Promised Land, because God said, "I'm tired of these knuckleheads. I'm going to make you walk around for 40 years, and the new generation is going to go into the Promised Land, and you guys are going to stay."
Yeah.
And so that's what we're taking new, and we're teaching it so they get it right the first time.
Yeah, man. This is so good. I just love it. I'm really grateful for this. One of the themes of the show is that truth changes everything. That if you begin with the core assumption that the truth exists, and it's not just a logical proposition, it's a person, it's Jesus, that you will change the world. And we've seen that happen in the past. Programs of racial unity in the church, as opposed to programs that specifically create division and resentment and anxiety and anger. But I'd love for you to just comment on that just for a moment, because how is the church the hands and feet of Jesus? How is that transforming the world? What are you seeing as you go about your work?
There's tremendous opportunity for the church to come in on this. It really is, because unfortunately it's been void. I mean, this idea, whenever I go and speak, and I speak, gee whiz, nearly 3 or 4 times a month, whenever I share that the United States has the highest percentage of children that grow up without a father in the world, there's a gasp. And then when I say times 3, there's like, oh my God. The fact that people don't know is shame on us because our media is, there's lies by omission. They're not wanting that information to get out. They don't want the patriarchy back. Yeah. This idea of, oh no, we can't have fathers knows best. The patriarchy is bad. That's being deliberate. But the church should know better. The church should know. And so how do we get back to this? Promoting, because when you promote marriage, you're not bashing gay marriage. And so whenever someone says to me, well, you're really religious guy, I said, no, my views hasn't changed since I graduated from high school. I wanted to start a good life. I wanted to get a job and take care of my family, raise my kids. That used to be considered American, not a political affiliate. It's not my fault that things might have moved so uber left. And so I said, look, do you support gay marriage? And this is, a progressive person. Do you support gay marriage? Yes, I do. Well, good. Then if you support gay marriage, then you have to support mine, because respect is a two-way street.
Yeah.
Right? You're supporting what you believe. I'm supporting what I believe. That used to be the norm of our society. Because I'm supporting mine, that doesn't mean I hate you.
Yeah.
And I think that's where a lot of churches and pastors have felt like they can't promote that, because if it does, it might be conceived as I hate gays, right. That kind of thing. And It's not. Yeah. It's not. It's have courage to stand up for God. So
yeah, let's talk about that courage for a moment, because I know that's a real passion of yours. You've said that our faith is not passive, that we need to activate it, and that the activation tool is courage.
Right. So throughout the scripture, I think I saw one reference where there's a fear is referenced 365 times in the Bible for each day of the year. And each time God says, "Do not be afraid." Yeah. He tells Joshua in Joshua 1:9, "Do not be afraid." I'm always with. Why would he need to tell Joshua? He saw everything what Moses had went through, what God did for Moses. He was right there. Why would he need? Because that's our human nature.
Yeah.
It's the first ingrained thing. So I encourage people, because here's the thing, courage is also contagious.
Yes.
When people see someone do something courageous, it makes them want to stand up and do the same. And the people that are with us right now, volunteers and people that are working with us in the Black community, I didn't know any of these people 3 years ago.
Right.
They're now friends with. I love them, but the only reason why they joined is because I was willing to be courageous. My wife and I both, to stand in the circle alone, but knowing that we're not alone, that the angels of God are all around us.
Yeah, man, that's such a great word. Well, I'm going to say your website one more time, because I think there are going to be some people watching and listening who've been through a Summit Ministries program. Their families have been through the Summit Ministries program. They're always looking for things they can be connected to and to support that would make a difference. So this is takechargeus.com. And we've been talking to Kendall Qualls. And this is an incredible story. Thank you for inspiring us. Thank you for speaking the truth. And I'm right now, while I'm talking with you, John Stonestreet from the Colson Center is speaking to the students across the street at the Summit Ministries program. 175 students over there right now, speaking to them on this exact topic. So I was just thinking, okay, good. We've got that going. We've got that going right. Thanks, man. This really means a lot. So takechargeus.com, and yes. All the best to you. I'm really excited to see what you're doing, how practical it is, and I'm really thankful to my wife, Stephanie, for making sure that you and I got connected.
Well, I'm humbled and honored at the same time. You know what? The reward I look for is that, well done, my good and faithful servant, and that is the God honest truth. I'm honored to do this.
Amen. Thank you to my guest, Kendall Qualls, for coming on the show today. You can find out more about his work at takechargeus.com. This podcast is a resource of Summit Ministries. At Summit, we come alongside the rising generation, their trainers, parents, and influencers, so that young adults may know God's truth and become champions of a biblical worldview. To learn more about Summit Ministries or get resources that can help you help the young adults in your life embrace and share the truth that changes everything, just visit summit.org. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.